"Make my Corvette run before midnight, and I'll release the lien on your garage," Vanessa Cole said. "Fail, and you hand me the keys tomorrow." The invitation-only showroom laughed. Daniel Mercer did not. He clipped one lead of his voltmeter to the engine block and the other to the Corvette's frame, then asked the restoration foreman to turn the key. The starter dragged. The meter jumped to 4.8 volts. Almost all the electrical force meant for the starter being wasted between two pieces of freshly painted metal. Daniel laid a temporary copper lead across the same gap. On the second try, the starter spun hard enough to make every mechanic in the room look up. He studied the flawless black powder coat around the engine mounts. "Your restorers didn't leave anything loose," he said. "They painted the electricity out of it." Vanessa's smile tightened. Behind her, a digital clock above the display wall read 47 p.m. The midnight deadline had been her idea. So had the lien. Cole Heritage Automotive had purchased the commercial note on Daniel's garage 3 weeks earlier, along with the vacant parcel beside it, because Vanessa wanted both properties for a new collector car showroom. "You touched the car before we had an agreement," she said. "I performed a non-invasive test with your foreman operating the ignition. I haven't removed a fastener." Daniel disconnected the temporary lead. The starter returned to its slow, wounded turn. His 14-year-old son, Eli, stood beyond the velvet rope with Daniel's inspection case under one arm. He had recorded the test from the moment Vanessa made the challenge. Daniel held out his hand for the case, removed a blank work authorization, and placed it on the polished reception counter. "Release of the entire lien, not a delay," he said. "The Corvette stays in its documented original configuration. Cold start, 20-minute road load test, heat soak, and hot restart. An independent Corvette engineer decides whether it passes. Your company puts a signed release in escrow before I turn another tool." Vanessa looked toward the 100 guests, collectors, lenders, and local business owners she had invited to watch the unveiling of a $1 million 1,969 Corvette L88. For 6 months, her company had promised that the car would lead its new heritage collection. For 6 months, the restored Corvette had stalled, kicked back through the carburetor, and refused to restart when hot. 3 specialists had replaced the carburetor, distributor, starter, battery cables, and most of the wiring harness. The car still could not finish a showroom demonstration. The crowd had laughed because Vanessa expected a small-town mechanic to refuse. Now refusal belonged to her. "You have 7 hours and 53 minutes, she said. "After the release is in escrow." Her general counsel, Martin Vale, stepped close and read Daniel's handwritten conditions. "The term run doesn't ordinarily include a road load test." "Then define it now. Your client called the car road ready in every invitation." Martin glanced at Vanessa. She gave a short nod. At 4:19 p.m., he began drafting the agreement. At 57, Daniel ran Mercer Machine and Brake, his 2-bay shop in Oildale, California. He repaired delivery trucks, farm equipment, older American cars, and anything else whose owner needed the machine back more than he needed a marble waiting room. Daniel had raised Eli alone since his wife died 6 years earlier. He was careful with money, slow with promises, and unusually stubborn about measurements. That stubbornness had kept the garage open through 2 weak winters. It had also created the lien now held by Cole Heritage Automotive. 4 years earlier, Daniel had borrowed against the property to replace a cracked lift, bring the electrical service up to code, and build a small machine room behind the second bay. The note was manageable until a produce distributor canceled its fleet contract. Daniel had never missed a regular payment, but a balloon installment of $86,000 came due after the original lender failed. Cole Heritage bought the note at a discount and refused Daniel's request for a 12-month extension. Vanessa's offer had been simple. She would forgive part of the debt if Daniel left by the end of the month. The garage sat at the mouth of the only access road wide enough for transporters to reach her planned showroom. Daniel's land was worth more to her empty than it was to him full. He could have taken her relocation check. It would have paid the balance, covered a year's rent elsewhere, and removed the risk. But the proposed building had no machine room, no yard for fleet trucks, and no apartment close enough for Eli to walk over after school. Daniel's 2 employees would have faced a 40-mile commute. He had asked for time. Vanessa had given him a deadline. The Corvette challenge came from a different problem. That afternoon, one of Daniel's longtime customers, retired Chevrolet engineer Warren Pike, had brought him to Cole's opening reception as a guest. Warren wanted Daniel to see the L88 before it was driven onto the display turntable. When the car failed to start for the third time, Vanessa's restoration team blamed the weather, the racing carburetor, and finally the vehicle's age. Daniel had watched the headlamps dim while the battery still showed 12.6 volts. He noticed that the starter housing, engine block, and frame were all separated by show-quality coating. He asked whether the team had measured voltage drop under load. Vanessa heard him. She also recognized him as the mechanic who would not leave her expansion parcel. In front of her guests, impatience became theater. Now Martin drafted, Eli recorded, and the Corvette sat with its hood open beneath white inspection lights. At 4:42, an independent escrow lawyer arrived electronically through a secure video call. Cole Heritage uploaded a signed lien release covering the land, improvements, fixtures, and business equipment at Mercer Machine and Brake. The release would become effective if Dr. Sarah Nolan, a retired General Motors electrical systems engineer agreed upon by both parties, certified the 4-part test before midnight. If Daniel failed, the existing note and foreclosure schedule remained unchanged. Daniel could not substitute the carburetor, distributor, wiring harness, starter, or battery. Any safety part he installed had to be disclosed and left with the car. Sarah lived 40 minutes away. Warren called her because she had judged NCRS technical events for 12 years and had no business relationship with either side. She read the agreement before accepting. Her fee would be split evenly, and her decision would be final for the limited purpose of the lien release. Martin turned the tablet toward Daniel. Once you sign, any interference before 4/7 is preserved as a company objection. Daniel read every page. Write that my meter lead and temporary bypass were witnessed and caused no alteration. Martin added it. Daniel signed at 4:51. Vanessa signed after him. Eli photographed the final pages and the escrow receipt. Only then did Daniel open his tool case. He started with the battery because a diagnosis should begin at the source, not at the most expensive part. The battery rested at 12.6 volts. Under cranking load, it fell to 10.4, still healthy. He measured the positive side from battery post to starter terminal. The loss was 0.2 of a volt. On the ground side, from battery negative to starter housing, the loss was 4.8. Plain English, Vanessa said. Daniel pointed to a water bottle on the counter. You've got a full bottle and a pinched hose. Looking at the bottle tells you nothing about the water that reaches the other end. He divided the ground path into sections. Battery to frame lost 0.2. Frame to engine lost 4.6. The failure sat between the chassis and the block. Cole's restoration foreman, Brent Harlan, folded his arms. We installed the factory strap exactly where it belongs. Show me. Brent pointed beneath the right engine mount. A braided ground strap ran from a frame tab to a bell housing bolt. It looked new, correct, and tight. Daniel photographed it before touching either fastener. He then measured across the strap itself. The braid carried current. The loss occurred at the frame tab. He removed the frame bolt while Eli logged the time. Beneath the ring terminal, the mounting face was covered in the same black powder coat as the chassis. A star washer had bitten through in 3 tiny places, but the contact area was no larger than 3 pencil points. At rest, a handheld meter saw continuity. Under starter load, the path behaved like a heater. The back of the ring terminal showed a second problem. A thin copper contact bridge had been folded around the bolt to reach a bare edge inside the tab. The bridge was cracked halfway through and darkened by heat. Brent leaned closer. That isn't ours. Daniel placed the bridge in a clean evidence tray without separating it from the strap. A dealer price tag remained under one edge. $14.20. It came through your parts department, Eli said, reading the tag. Vanessa gave the boy a hard look. Daniel moved the tray farther from the edge. A cracked bridge explains why the car sometimes starts, Daniel said. The coating explains why it never had a dependable return path. But I'm not calling the whole job finished from one bad connection. He used a low current meter to test every ground point before removing anything else. The body ground was acceptable. The instrument ground wandered when he moved the harness. The distributor housing showed a smaller but measurable loss. More important, the engine-to-frame resistance changed as the engine shifted on its mounts during cranking. At 5:26, Sarah Nolan arrived carrying 2 calibrated meters, a thermal camera, and a sealed data recorder. She was 63, silver-haired, and direct. She checked Daniel's instruments against hers, reviewed Eli's video, and inspected the untouched coating around the mount. "The temporary bypass proved a path problem," she said. "It didn't prove the car will survive a heat cycle." "Agreed." Vanessa watched them from beside the display turntable. "Can he make the test by midnight?" Sarah did not look up. "Ask me at 11:59. Daniel requested the restoration file. Brent produced 3 binders containing invoices, photographs, engine specifications, paint codes, and parts receipts, totaling $212,000. The binders included alignment sheets and compression results. They did not include a single voltage drop test. That absence bothered Daniel more than a bad number would have. Any competent electrical diagnosis of a slow crank began with loaded measurements. Cole's specialists had replaced an original-style starter, then a carburetor, then a distributor, then an entire front harness. Someone had either failed to perform the simplest test or performed it and removed the result. Daniel asked for the shop's digital work orders. Martin answered, "The agreement gives you access to the vehicle and its restoration records, not internal company systems." "Then give Sarah a read-only export for this VIN." "Not required." Sarah looked at the binders. "The missing diagnostic history limits what I can certify. The test agreement requires documented original configuration. If there's an undisclosed modification, I need to know." That changed Martin's calculation. At 5:43, he authorized Brent to print the customer-facing work order history from the restoration portal. The pages showed 12 repair visits and 4 outside specialists. The first 2 visits mentioned slow cranking. The third described an intermittent ignition fault. The fourth recommended a high-torque starter. Later visits recommended a replacement carburetor, distributor, and harness. Every expensive recommendation carried an approval signature from Vanessa or her collection manager. One line on the 7th visit read, "Ground path checked, no defect found." Daniel circled it. "Where's the measurement?" Brent's jaw tightened. The former electrical technician handled that. "Name? Luis Ortega. He left in March." "Why?" Martin stepped in. "Personnel matters are outside this repair." Daniel did not argue. The clock read 5:58. He asked for permission to clean one factory ground pad to bare metal and install a period-correct braided strap with serrated washers. Vanessa objected that the agreement prohibited non-original parts. "The braid is made to the factory dimensions," Daniel said. "The damaged bridge is a modern workaround. Bare contact at the factory pad is the original design." Brent shook his head. "The chassis finish has a lifetime warranty. Grinding it voids the coating warranty. A lifetime coating that keeps the starter from working is not an automotive system. It's sculpture." Sarah intervened before Vanessa could respond. She examined factory assembly diagrams Warren had brought from his reference library. The drawing showed a masked circular ground pad at the exact tab. The powder coater had been instructed to keep that surface bare when the car was built. Restoring the bare circle would return the chassis to specification, not alter it. Vanessa approved one controlled repair, photographed before and after. Daniel masked a circle slightly smaller than the ring terminal. He removed the coating with a hand scraper, not a power grinder, until clean steel appeared. He treated the edge against corrosion, installed the correct strap, and torqued the fastener to specification. He repeated the process at the engine end after finding paint beneath that terminal as well. At 6:31, the ground side voltage loss during cranking measured 0.18 of a volt. The starter speed rose from 84 revolutions per minute to 176. The L88 fired after 3 turns and settled into a rough, heavy idle. Several guests applauded. Daniel raised one hand without looking at them. The engine stumbled at 20 seconds. At 32 it died. Vanessa's expression recovered. One wire didn't fix it. It fixed the starter circuit. The challenge was to fix the car, and the test has 4 parts. We've completed none of them. Daniel checked fuel pressure. It held. He checked charging voltage. The alternator produced 14.1. The ignition coil, however, received uneven voltage as the engine rocked. A second ground path in the new wiring harness had been attached to the painted firewall. The distributor module depended on that path for a clean reference. The Corvette's original transistor ignition had been removed during restoration and replaced with a visually similar electronic conversion hidden inside the distributor. The agreement required the documented configuration, and the binder called the conversion an approved reliability modification. Daniel could not remove it without violating the terms. He could give it the ground it had been designed to receive, At 6:54, he cleaned the masked firewall pad shown on the harness drawing and installed the harness terminal directly against metal. The ignition reference stabilized. The engine started again and ran for 6 minutes, long enough for coolant temperature to rise and the idle to smooth. Then a faint snapping sound came from the right side of the engine bay. Sarah's thermal camera showed the starter cable warming near a decorative stainless clamp. Daniel shut the engine down. Beneath the clamp, the replacement cable had been pinched against a sharp edge. The insulation was intact but compressed. Heat and vibration could eventually expose the conductor. It was not the cause of the no start. It was a safety defect created during the harness replacement. Vanessa checked the clock. "Can you protect it without replacing the cable?" "Yes, if the conductor tests clean." He disconnected the battery, removed the clamp, and inspected the cable with Sarah. The copper showed no damage. Daniel installed an insulated separator in an existing factory hole, logged it as a safety correction, and retained the clamp in the evidence tray. At 7:18, Martin received an email and pulled Vanessa aside. Their conversation stayed low, but Daniel heard the words, "Access Road," "Financing Committee," and "tomorrow morning." Vanessa returned to the car with a different kind of patience. "Your garage debt is not part of this diagnostic discussion unless you pass every condition. It became part of the discussion when you bet it. You were offered a fair relocation package. For a building that can't take my work. For a business that may not survive the balloon payment." That criticism was accurate. Daniel's cash position was thin. He had used the milling machine less than expected, and the produce fleet he thought would repay the expansion had left. Vanessa had not created those facts. She had simply bought the right to use them. Daniel returned to the Corvette. Then midnight should be interesting. At the garage across town, Daniel's senior technician, Owen Rusk, was trying to finish 3 promised customer jobs with 1 apprentice. Daniel had closed early to take Warren to the reception. Staying at Cole's showroom until midnight meant the delivery van brake job would be late, and a landscaping company needed its truck by dawn. Daniel called Owen and explained the challenge. Owen was silent for a moment. "You're gambling the shop on somebody else's Corvette?" "She already scheduled the lockout." "I'm trying to remove it." "And if you lose?" "Then we document every customer car and move what we can before morning." Owen exhaled. "I'll get the van done. The landscape truck waits." That delay cost the shop a $500 rush credit and possibly a customer. Daniel authorized it anyway. A deadline only mattered if somebody paid for the hours inside it. Eli stood near the restoration binder, comparing the printed portal history with the invoice tabs. "Dad, Visit 7 is missing a page number." Daniel looked. The printout jumped from page 31 to 33. The footer counted 34 pages, but only 33 had printed. Martin examined the stack. "Printer error. Printed again." Brent returned to the office terminal. A minute later, he came back without the page. "The portal export excludes internal attachments," he said. Sarah closed her meter case halfway. "The agreement says restoration records. An attachment tied to the exact visit is a restoration record." Martin asked what the attachment was. Brent said he did not know. Vanessa ordered him to display the record on the office monitor. The attachment title appeared in the visit log, Volt Drop Follow-Up, L. Ortega. Its access status read archived by administrator. "Who archived it?" Vanessa asked. Brent looked toward the restoration director, Paul Danner, who had remained near the back of the room since Daniel began testing. Paul had managed the L88 project from the bare chassis forward. He was polished, experienced, and responsible for most of the $212,000 in work Vanessa had approved. "Old technicians leave unfinished notes," Paul said. "We archive drafts, so they don't become part of the final vehicle record." "Open it," Vanessa said. "The archive requires corporate credentials." Vanessa held out her hand for the keyboard. The attached report was only 1 page. Luis Ortega had measured 4.1 volts between the engine and frame during cranking, nearly the same loss Daniel found. He recommended masking and refinishing the factory ground pad before further parts replacement. Beneath that recommendation, a management note read, "Cosmetic impact unacceptable before collection launch. Continue component substitution. Revisit chassis contact after Concours review." The approval initials belonged to Paul Danner. Nobody laughed this time. Paul stepped closer to the monitor. "That report was preliminary. We had inconsistent results." "Where are the inconsistent results?" Sarah asked. Luis didn't complete them. He completed enough to identify a 4-volt loss. Paul turned to Vanessa. We had a 7-figure presentation vehicle. Scraping a fresh chassis finish without ruling out the starter, ignition, and harness would have been irresponsible. Daniel looked at the invoices. So you ruled out the expensive parts by billing for all of them. Vanessa raised a hand. That's enough. Her anger was not aimed only at Paul. Daniel could see the calculation behind it. Cole Heritage Automotive owned the restoration division. Publicly admitting that its director had buried a correct test could damage dozens of customer projects. Firing him in the middle of the challenge might look like an admission. Protecting him might cost more. At 7:49, Vanessa ordered Martin to preserve the portal record and suspended Paul's access pending review. She did not apologize to Daniel. She did not need to for the test to continue. Paul collected his jacket. Before leaving, he stopped beside Brent and said something too low for the room to hear. Brent's face changed. He followed Paul to the office doors, then returned alone. The archived report included Luis Ortega's personal mobile number because he had signed it as the technician of record. Martin objected to calling a former employee during an active dispute. Sarah answered that she would not rely on a document whose author neither side had been allowed to confirm. Vanessa authorized a recorded call with counsel present. Luis answered from a municipal bus garage in Bakersfield, where he now supervised electrical maintenance. He remembered the L88 immediately. The first time it reached his bay, he found 3.9 volts on the ground side. The result changed with engine movement, so he removed the frame bolt and discovered powder coat beneath the terminal. He asked permission to mask and expose the factory pad. Paul refused because the chassis had already been photographed for an insurance appraisal. Luis then made the copper bridge as a temporary diagnostic part. He folded it around the coated tab to reach bare steel on the inner edge. With the bridge installed, ground loss fell below 0.5 volt, and the car started 6 times. Why leave a temporary bridge on the car? Vanessa asked. I didn't. I tagged it, removed it, and put it in the work order tray with my report. Daniel looked at the cracked bridge in the evidence tray. This one has heat discoloration. Somebody installed it as a permanent path. Luis asked to see a close photograph. Eli held the camera above the tray while Martin shared the image. Luis identified his own small file mark along one edge. He had shaped the bridge by hand because its only purpose was to prove the coated joint was the fault. I wrote temp test only across the center with blue layout dye, he said. If the dye is gone, somebody polished it. Under Sarah's inspection lamp, a trace of blue remained inside the fold where polishing compound had not reached. Daniel swabbed the spot and sealed the swab. The bridge had not been ordered as a $14 repair part. It had been entered through parts inventory after Luis left, cleaned until it looked presentable, and installed in place of the chassis correction he recommended. Luis had objected when Paul directed him to replace the starter instead. After the car failed again, Paul moved him to used car inspections. Luis resigned 2 weeks later. He had kept no company files, but his final paycheck showed the exact separation date already in Cole's payroll system. The portal metadata showed that Paul archived the report 30 minutes after Human Resources recorded the resignation. Vanessa asked Luis what a proper repair should have cost. 1 hour to document the finish, mask both pads, expose clean metal, protect the edges, and retest. The strap was fine then. I wouldn't have replaced it. And the other parts? The first starter tested good. I never tested the second carburetor or the later harness because I was gone. Vanessa offered to pay him for the call. Luis said the bus garage already paid him for the hour, and he would not take money from Cole without a written consulting agreement. Daniel understood why. Before ending the call, Luis addressed Sarah rather than Vanessa. Please record that a continuity beep is not a loaded test. That was the argument. Management said the meter showed a connection, so the ground had to be good. Sarah read the statement back to him and attached it to her file. The call did more than prove Paul had ignored one report. It closed the simplest alternate explanation, that Daniel's test happened to resemble an abandoned guess. The temporary bridge in the car was the same bridge Luis built, and its remaining die, file mark, parts entry, and portal history showed how a diagnostic aid became a concealed substitute for the repair. Vanessa stood beside the open hood after the call ended. I'll release the lien now, if you sign that tonight's operational result remains undetermined. Daniel studied her. It was the first credible chance she had offered to correct the property pressure without waiting for the engine test. The release would protect the garage even if the Corvette failed for an unrelated reason. In exchange, her company could say the land settlement was separate from the challenge. No confidentiality? He asked. No confidentiality. No admission from either side about the test. It was a reasonable offer. It was also incomplete. Owen's phone call had not happened yet. Paul's archived decisions had not been audited, and the car still had to prove that the corrected path survived the exact condition that caused months of failure. If Daniel stopped now, Vanessa could release his property and quietly label the technical dispute unresolved. Luis's work would return to an archive with a new note instead of a consequence. Put the release in escrow without changing the test, Daniel said. If the car has another fault, Sarah should name it. If it passes, your record should say why. You're risking your building to make my company write a sentence. The sentence determines whether the next mechanic gets heard before the next customer buys a harness. Vanessa withdrew the offer. Daniel knew he might have rejected the safest decision of his life. He also knew that the garage was worth defending because it allowed him to do work without turning a measurement into whatever answer paid the largest invoice. Daniel spent the next 30 minutes inspecting every primary connection affected by the restoration. He found no other major electrical defects. Sarah placed tamper seals on the carburetor, distributor, starter, battery, and harness connectors. Warren documented the engine number, casting dates, and visible factory components. By 8:22, the Corvette had been shut down long enough to begin the official cold start portion. The agreement defined cold start as coolant below 100 degrees and oil below 90. The engine needed another 40 minutes. Vanessa used the pause to make Daniel an offer. They stood in a small conference room overlooking the showroom. Through the glass, Eli and Warren remained with the Corvette. Martin placed a 2-page relocation agreement on the table. Cole Heritage would forgive the full $86,000 balloon payment, pay Daniel $120,000, move his equipment, and lease him a 4-bay building for 12 months at $1. In exchange, Daniel would withdraw the midnight challenge, acknowledge that the Corvette's condition was disputed, and vacate his property within 10 days. It was better than the offer she had made before. It would protect Owen and the apprentice. It would give Daniel cash he had never held at one time. It would also move Eli away from the block where he had grown up, remove the machine room Daniel built with his wife's insurance proceeds, and put the business in a building Cole could take back after a year. "Why now?" Daniel asked. Vanessa did not pretend. "Because my access road financing closes tomorrow. If your parcel remains encumbered by a dispute, the committee delays the project. You need certainty. I need land. This gives us both what we need. It gives me a rented shop and gives you the ground under mine. It gives your son a father who isn't working every night to service debt." That landed because it was partly true. Daniel had missed Eli's last 2 baseball games. He had eaten dinner at the workbench more often than at their kitchen table. The garage was a legacy, but it could also become an excuse to spend a life defending concrete. He asked for 5 minutes alone with his son. Eli came into the conference room still holding the inspection log. Daniel showed him the offer and explained the numbers without hiding the risks. "If I take it, the shop moves," Daniel said. "Owen keeps working. We don't owe anybody, but we leave our building." Eli looked through the glass at the Corvette. "Would you take it if the test was already over?" "That isn't the question." "It is for me." Daniel waited. "Mom helped choose the blue door," Eli said. "That matters, but she didn't choose it, so we'd have to obey anybody who bought a paper." It was not a speech. Eli returned the agreement to the table and went back to his clipboard. Daniel declined the offer. At 8:51, Martin delivered a formal notice stating that Daniel had interfered with the Corvette before the challenge agreement was signed by connecting the bypass lead. Sarah attached the notice to her certification file along with the video showing that the temporary lead had been removed before the agreement and caused no physical change. At 9:03, coolant temperature fell below 100 degrees. Sarah called everyone to the car. Daniel verified the transmission was in neutral, the parking brake held, and the wheels were chocked. He touched nothing inside the sealed components. Brent operated the throttle according to the factory starting procedure. Sarah placed her data recorder across battery voltage, starter current, ignition feed, engine speed, and ground side drop. The engine turned twice and fired. It settled at 1100 revolutions per minute, then came down as the choke released. Oil pressure held. Charging voltage remained steady. Daniel watched the ground connection through the thermal camera. The repaired pad stayed cool. The cold start passed at 9:05. The road load test could not legally occur on public streets because the Corvette's registration had not been renewed. Sarah approved the chassis dynamometer in Cole's restoration bay, provided Brent operated the car, and the wheels were restrained under her supervision. At 9:22, they rolled the L88 onto the dyno. Daniel inspected the straps himself. Sarah verified fan placement and exhaust extraction. The test required 20 minutes at varying load, never exceeding 3,500 revolutions per minute. It was not a horsepower run. It was enough heat and vibration to reproduce the failure without abusing an irreplaceable engine. For 12 minutes, the Corvette ran cleanly. At minute 13, the ignition trace showed a brief disturbance. Daniel heard it before the graph displayed it, one clipped miss under steady load. He signaled Brent to hold speed. The miss came again. Vanessa checked the clock. 9:39. Daniel used an insulated probe to move the harness near the firewall ground. The engine did not react. He checked the distributor feed. Stable. He moved to the back of the engine and saw a faint arc at a metal radio suppression shield mounted near the coil. The shield had been powder-coated on both sides and secured beneath the same firewall stud as the ignition reference. Under vibration, its edge touched the coil terminal boot. It was not carrying enough current to burn, but it was stealing the clean reference signal the conversion module needed. Daniel asked Sarah to pause the test. He removed the shield, documented its location, and found a hairline carbon track inside the boot. The boot could not be replaced under the agreement because it was part of the new harness. Sarah allowed cleaning and repositioning as restoration correction, not component substitution. Paul Danner had installed the shield during the final cosmetic assembly. His work order called it a visual authenticity detail. The original 1969 car had used radio suppression in a different arrangement. The modern ignition hidden inside the distributor did not tolerate the copied placement. Daniel cleaned the boot, insulated the shield at the factory-safe distance, and restarted the load cycle from zero. At 10:11, the Corvette completed 20 continuous minutes without a miss. Coolant held at 188 degrees. Oil pressure stayed above 35 pounds at load. Ground side voltage remained below 0.2 during every starter event. 2 tests remained: heat soak and hot restart. The agreement required a 30-minute shutdown after the load test. During that time, underhood temperature would rise even though the engine stopped producing heat. That was when the Corvette had always failed. Sarah sealed the hood at 10:14. No one could cool the starter, charge the battery, or adjust the carburetor during the soak. At 10:20, Owen called Daniel from the garage. "Brent Harlan just called me," Owen said. "Offered me a supervisor job at Cole's restoration shop." Daniel looked across the showroom. Brent stood near Vanessa, phone in hand. "What did he ask you?" "Whether you'd tested the Corvette before today. Whether you knew about the ground issue before the reception. He said if I could confirm it, they'd start me Monday." "What did you tell him?" "That I've never seen the car." "Anything else?" "That if he calls again, I'll record the time and send it to your lawyer." Daniel thanked him and ended the call. He told Sarah and Martin immediately. Martin asked for proof. Daniel showed the call time. It proved contact, not the offer. Owen sent a written statement describing the conversation and preserved his phone records. Vanessa confronted Brent in the restoration office. He admitted calling Owen but claimed he was trying to establish whether Daniel's test was truly spontaneous. Vanessa asked whether he offered employment. Brent said he mentioned an opening. Martin advised Vanessa privately. At 10:31, she removed Brent from the test area and ordered him not to contact anyone at Mercer Machine and Brake. "Your people keep making this worse," Daniel said. "My people are trying to protect a company from a challenge I made too quickly." It was the first time she admitted that much. You can still honor it without a fight. If the car passes. At 10:44, the 30-minute heat soak ended. Underhood air measured 149 degrees. Starter housing temperature was 162. Battery voltage remained 12.5. Sarah broke the hood seal. Brent was no longer available to operate the car, so Warren took the driver's seat with approval from both sides. He had driven L88 Corvettes during development and knew the hot start procedure. Daniel stood back. This test had to belong to the machine, not to his hands. Warren pressed the clutch and turned the key. The starter spun at 168 revolutions per minute. The engine fired in less than 2 seconds. It idled for 60 seconds without a miss. Sarah marked the hot restart passed at 10:46. Vanessa looked toward Martin. The agreement says before midnight. We have time to repeat it. Sarah reviewed the language. It requires one cold start, one road load cycle, one heat soak, and one hot restart. All four passed. The car might fail after a longer run. Any car might. That is not the standard you signed. Martin requested a second heat cycle as a voluntary confirmation. Daniel agreed only if the first certification remained valid and the escrow condition was considered satisfied. Sarah documented that status. At 10:53, the escrow lawyer confirmed receipt of her preliminary certification and locked the release from unilateral withdrawal. The lien was not yet recorded as released, but Vanessa could no longer cancel the document. She had one remaining argument. At 11:02, Paul Dana returned with a security officer and a cardboard parts box. Martin told him he had no access to the vehicle. Paul said the box contained the Corvette's original transistor ignition amplifier, removed during restoration. He claimed the current hidden electronic conversion meant the car was not in original configuration and therefore Daniel's test failed. Daniel did not touch the box. The restoration binder identified the conversion as the documented delivered configuration. The challenge agreement prohibited Daniel from substituting it. Paul had approved its installation 6 months earlier and used it in every prior attempt. You are arguing that I should have violated the agreement to satisfy it, Daniel said. Paul turned to Vanessa. An L88 with an aftermarket ignition cannot be certified as original. Sarah answered, I am certifying the operational test defined in your contract. I'm not awarding a concourse score. Martin asked security to escort Paul out. Paul set the box on the floor. When this goes public, every owner will wonder what else is wrong with our restorations. Vanessa's face hardened. That question began when you archived a correct diagnostic result and sold me parts instead. The security officer led him away. At 11:10, the second load cycle began. This time, Vanessa stood beside Sarah's data recorder instead of in the guest area. The showroom had emptied to fewer than 30 people, but several collectors remained because they understood what they were watching. Not a miracle and not a contest of pride. A system finally being tested in the order it should have been tested months earlier. The Corvette completed 15 minutes. Daniel ended the voluntary run there to preserve the engine. After another heat soak, it restarted at 11:44. Sarah signed her final certificate at 11:47. She listed the cause in plain language. Coating on factory ground pads and a cracked $14 contact bridge created excessive voltage loss under starter load. A mispositioned radio suppression shield then disturbed the replacement ignition reference under vibration. Correcting the ground interfaces and shield position restored reliable starting and operation without replacing the carburetor, distributor, starter, battery, or harness. She also attached the archived report proving Cole's restoration management had measured substantially the same voltage loss months earlier. At 11:50, the escrow lawyer released the signed lien discharge for recording. Martin transmitted it to the county's electronic recorder with the filing fee. The system returned a submission number and effective timestamp. Vanessa had 9 minutes left to do what she had resisted all evening. She walked to the reception counter, picked up the microphone, and asked the remaining guests to stay. The Corvette passed the test defined in our agreement, she said. Cole Heritage Automotive has released its lien on Mercer machine and brake. The discharge was filed tonight. She did not smile. She did not blame Paul alone. Our restoration division had a correct voltage drop finding and failed to act on it. We replaced major components without resolving the path that supplied them. I approved those expenses. An independent review begins tomorrow, and affected customers will receive their diagnostic records. Daniel had expected lawyers, not that statement. Vanessa made it because the collectors in front of her would learn the facts anyway, and because a controlled admission was now better business than another denial. Her motive did not make the correction less real. At 11:57, she handed Daniel the original lien release receipt. Your garage is yours, she said. It was mine at 4 o'clock. Now my company can't pretend otherwise. The clock changed to midnight. The Corvette idled on the turntable for the first time since the restoration began. Its exhaust note was deep but not theatrical, the uneven mechanical sound of a high-compression engine built for more than display. Warren listened with his hands in his coat pockets. Sarah packed her data recorder. Eli wrote the final time in the inspection log. Daniel closed the hood himself. The next morning, Cole's Access Road Financing Committee postponed the showroom expansion. Without Daniel's parcel, the original transporter route did not meet the turning radius requirement. Vanessa redesigned the project around the land she actually owned. It cost the company time and money, but it did not destroy the business. Her restoration division faced a harder correction. Martin hired an outside automotive forensic firm to audit 12 completed projects managed by Paul. 4 contained archived diagnostic notes recommending low-cost tests before parts replacement. Cole refunded unsupported labor and parts charges. Paul's employment ended after the review confirmed he had tied project bonuses to build restoration revenue and completion appearances, not to verified function. Luis Ortega, the former electrical technician, received a written apology and payment for the consulting hours required to authenticate his archived report. Vanessa offered him his job back. He declined and asked that his name remain attached to the original finding. Brent Harlan kept his position only after a formal discipline agreement and an apology to Owen. Owen accepted the apology, but not Cole's employment offer. At Mercer Machine and Brake, the landscaping truck customer complained about the missed dawn delivery. Daniel refunded the rush charge and finished the repair by noon. The owner, after hearing why the delay occurred, kept the account. Not every consequence became a reward. The shop lost a full day of labor and nearly $2,000 in canceled work. The difference was that the building underneath that work no longer belonged to someone else's deadline. 3 days later, the county recorded the discharge. Daniel printed the document and placed it in the same metal case as the challenge agreement. He did not frame it. Property papers belonged where they could be found when needed. Vanessa returned the following Friday in the Corvette. She came without assistance. The car had completed 160 miles and 6 hot restarts. She parked outside the blue garage door and waited until Daniel finished a brake inspection. "No failure?" he asked. "None." She handed him a check for his documented labor, Sarah's fee, the rush credit he had lost, and the $14 bridge. Daniel compared it with the invoice and accepted it. "I'm not paying for a victory," she said. "I'm paying for work." "Then the number is right." She looked toward the access road beyond his fence. "I could still make you an offer for the property." "You could. Would you listen? If you start with what it's worth to me, not what you think I'm afraid of." Vanessa nodded. She had received an accurate answer. Before leaving, she opened the Corvette's hood. The black chassis still looked perfect. Only 2 small circles beneath hidden terminals had been returned to bare metal. Daniel had covered the edges with clear protective compound, so moisture could not creep under the coating. Eli came from the office, carrying a new braided ground strap for an old farm truck. Daniel handed him the meter. "Battery says 12.6, Eli said. "That tells you the source." Eli clipped one lead to the block and one to the frame, exactly as Daniel had done in the showroom. "Then we measure the path under load." Vanessa watched the boy place the leads before she closed the Corvette's hood. That evening, Daniel and Eli repainted the lower edge of the garage's blue door where transport chains had chipped it years earlier. They did not repaint the whole thing. Eli masked the old brush marks his mother had left along the inside jamb because neither of them wanted a perfect finish badly enough to erase the hand that had put the first one there. When they finished, Daniel turned off the bay lights. The property release receipt rested in the locked metal case. The old Corvette was gone, the midnight clock was gone, and the laughter from the showroom had no work left to do. On the bench, the cracked $14 contact bridge sat in a labeled evidence bag beside the voltmeter. It was small enough to disappear under 2 fingers. Daniel left it there until Monday, when Eli would use it to explain to the apprentice why a full battery could still deliver nothing to a starter. Outside, the blue door came down on its own tracks and met the concrete floor of a garage that no longer had a lean against it.